Mr. Boddy was lucky to survive his car crash, although he was sure that there was more than luck involved. When he came back from hospital, he told us that everything had changed. A new life was about to begin for him and for Arlington Hall. He was going to give up everything to lead the simple life, or so he would have us believe. And no one else had been offered the choice between the way things were and the sweetness and light that Mr. Boddy seemed so suddenly to have found. And someone didn't believe in it, did they? Because poor Mr. Boddy went to his reward a bit sooner than he expected.
Wrench. Fingerprints, Mrs. White and Professor Plum. A live bullet. Fingerprints, Colonel Mustard.
How much more time do you want, Professor? Mr. Boddy will be gone by Monday, and then the auctioneers will be in.
Maybe they won't notice.
Well, you noticed, and you're no professional. By the way, you've been making quite a nice little living out of me and Mr. Green, haven't you? Until Mr. Boddy saw the light. It must be very inconvenient for you.
I didn't take that much.
Well, it won't look like that when Mr. Green starts to talk, will it?
He won't.
Oh, yes, he will. He can't face going to jail. He'll name you as the ringleader, the mastermind.
He can't. I only made a fraction of what he made on those antiques.
And then I shall have to look out for my own salvation, shan't I? Come to think of it, blaming you might be the right solution for all of us.
No. There has to be another way.
Then kill Mr. Green. He's too dangerous to live.
Has anybody told you that I was nearly killed? Some fool had wired up Mr. Boddy's safe to the mains. I'd taken the spare key to the safe from the hollowed-out book in the library, and when I went to open it, there was a shout of warning. I couldn't tell you who it was, and then I was flat on my back. I was hoping that I might find a certain letter in there, but I don't suppose it matters now. You might care to ask Professor Plum what on earth he was doing with a gun earlier. Yes, a gun. I distinctly saw him move some books in the library and hide a gun there. I wonder if he was intending to use it on Boddy.
A letter and receipt from antique dealer to Mr. Boddy, thanking him for his excellent custom over recent months. Fingerprints, Mr. Boddy and Mrs. Peacock. Knife hidden. Fingerprints, Miss Scarlett, Mrs. Peacock and Mr. Boddy. Blood on knife. Tests show blood to be Mr. Boddy's.
Yes. Yes, of course you'll get your money, man. Now, are you going to take my business or not? Right. Right. I want £50 each way on Royal Scarab. You're right.
How much are you in hock for now?
The lot. Everything.
You can't pay back Uncle Boddy's loan.
It never got any further than a bookmaker.
You and I share a similar problem, don't we, Colonel? Uncle Boddy isn't signing this place, my inheritance, over to Brother Jerome until Monday. Time enough for a man of action to find a solution, I would have thought.
It's all a game to him, isn't it?
Yes, but two can play these games, Colonel. And I have an idea for a little gambit of our own.
A small key under the table. The spare key to the safe. Fingerprints, Mrs. White. Electric wires taped to handle of safe door. Fingerprints, Mrs. White and Colonel Mustard.
What on earth was that? Did you see a flash?
My God, it's Mrs. White.
She's unconscious.
Will she be all right?
Don't, for God's sake, don't touch anything. Somebody sent for a doctor. I think she's been electrocuted.
There is nothing of interest here. There is nothing of interest here.
There's no point in asking Mr. Boddy anything. That's one leopard who hasn't changed his spots. Whatever Brother Jerome thinks.
Do you think he knows about the antiques?
Oh, what does it matter? Someone's going to notice that half the antiques in this place are missing. You've seen to that. And they're going to blame you. Because I'm just a little old lady who's been led astray by a wicked con man. So, you better think of something.
You're not getting out of this.
Oh, shut up, will you? By the time I've finished, nobody is going to believe a word you've said. And I'm not going to prison. Not for you, Mr. Boddy, or anyone else. And that is a promise.
What on earth am I supposed to do?
Well, you can take these to the dining room for a start. And then if you want to sleep easy in your bed at night, you'd better think of something, hadn't you?
No, I have no recollection of seeing anything like that. I don't think I was near the kitchen all weekend, if that's where they keep such things. Boddy surprised me in the study, going through his desk. I'd broken into it with the knife to see if I could find anything about his handing over the house to Brother Jerome. When I saw him, something snapped, and I attacked him with the knife. Of course he took it from me. Oh, it was all so stupid. I'm afraid I know nothing about Boddy's gun. I haven't seen it, and I can't help you. I'm so sorry. I saw them over dinner in the dining room. Beyond that, I can't help you. I'm afraid candlesticks come a long way down on my list of priorities at the moment. No, I'm afraid I can't help you. I gather Plum and Mrs. White were trying to unblock a drain in the yard. You really ought to ask them. Oh, for goodness sake, whatever next? No, I have not seen any rope. Furthermore, I don't expect to see any rope either now or at any time in the foreseeable future. Does that satisfy you? Boddy had told us all of his ridiculous notion of taking holy orders and expected us to believe that he was taking a vow of silence. A totally absurd idea, but it was never safe to assume anything with Boddy. Colonel Mustard was obviously rather concerned about this latest turn of events, if his peculiar behavior was anything to go by. I was passing the dining room, and I saw him bending down by the standard lamp doing something with the wires, although, if he hadn't been glancing furtively over his shoulder, I would probably have thought no more about it. There's bound to be something I've forgotten, but I can't tell you any more at the moment.
Lead pipe. Fingerprints, Mrs. White. Bloodstains. Tests show blood to be Professor Plum's. A pen under the chair. It belongs to Mr. Green. A bullet embedded in the wall.
Take it! Go on!
Get away from me. Take it away!
Mrs. White is going to talk, and when she does, we're both in the dock. So unless you want to explain all this to the judge... No.
I'm not going to do it! Look!
I'll make sure your little blackmail racket comes out into the open. And my friends from London will be coming to see you, Professor. But if I'm in jail, there'd be nothing I could do to stop them, would there? They don't like blackmailers.
What will they do to me?
I think you'd be better off if the police did lock you up. There. Good boy. Go and deal with Boddy. It's your only chance.
No! Take it away! Take it away! I can't do it! I can't do it!
I do know that Mrs. White and the Professor were doing some ghastly job trying to clear a blocked drain or something. Professor Plum kept asking where the tools were kept. Really, I was in no position to offer advice. I don't think I've ever seen a wrench in my life. Yes, I did see it. Uncle Boddy and Mrs. Peacock were in the study, and that's where I saw the knife. I waited until they'd gone, and then I took it. It's no use asking me what I was going to do with it. I just don't know. I lost my nerve and hid the knife in the lounge. I don't know what I was thinking of. No, I can't help you. I haven't seen Uncle Boddy's gun for ages. He practices in the billiard room, sometimes. He's got a kind of a shooting gallery in there, although I don't remember seeing him use it this weekend. I expect you mean the silver candlesticks in the dining room. Do you know, I was in the dining room this evening, and I honestly can't remember whether they were there or not. What I can tell you is that I saw Mr. Green with the candlesticks in the corridor earlier on. Ah, the rope. I suppose I have to tell you what actually happened. I just hope you believe me. You see, I wanted to stop Uncle Boddy. I had to stop him, but I didn't know what to do. I took the rope from the hall cupboard and went to see Colonel Mustard with it in the lounge. I had this silly idea of trying to frighten Uncle Boddy with it. The Colonel thought it was ridiculous, and he took the rope off me. He went off with it, and I didn't see it again. I didn't really want to hurt Uncle Boddy. You probably know that Mr. Boddy was my uncle. What you may not know is that he had always told me that I would inherit Arlington Hall and everything in it. And then suddenly, out of the blue, he informed us that he was giving it all away to some obscure order of monks. I know they helped him after his accident, but I've always been there for him. Everybody hated him, you know. That's why I wasn't surprised when I saw Mr. Green wandering around looking absolutely furious and holding a pair of candlesticks. Colonel Mustard was watching from the shadows, but he didn't do anything to stop him. I'm sorry, that's about it for the present, I'm afraid.
Both candlesticks. Fingerprints, Mr. Green. A glass and stain on the floor. Tests show stain to be wine. Fingerprints on glass, Mrs. Peacock.
If you want to drink while Rome burns, that's fine, but count me out.
Oh, don't be so childish. If we don't work together, we don't stand a chance. And you know it.
You really do have a nerve. Who introduced Uncle Boddy to this Brother Jerome and his henchmen?
I can assure you I didn't do it to cut my own throat, even though that is exactly what happened.
You were always creeping around him, trying to get your hands on him and his money. You can sneer at me as much as you like, but I'm losing Arlington Hall and my inheritance.
You are losing everything because you borrowed from loan sharks against your inheritance. Oh, yes, didn't you know your uncle knew that? My dear, I feel exactly the same way about you. But whether you like it or not, unless we pull together, we'll both go down. Now, is that what you want?
Mrs. White's attitude to everything that was happening was just typical. She started to play the innocent little woman again, and she'd probably have gotten away with it. She told me that I should kill Boddy myself, even gave me 2 heavy candlesticks, although it was not clear if she intended them to be weapons. She thought that Boddy had received a letter from the antique dealers and tried to get it back. She said that Boddy kept trying to show a letter to Mustard. but I don't know how much he knows. No, absolutely not. I haven't seen any rope inside this house or out. I'm sorry. I'm going to tell you straight away where I was around the time of the murder, so that you can eliminate me and concentrate on finding the murderer. I was with Mrs. White and Colonel Mustard in the lounge for a while, and then Mrs. White and I went down to the kitchen. You can check up on that. There were lots of people who would have been happy to see Boddy come to a sticky end, you know. I heard a major row coming from the study earlier in the day. Then Mrs. Peacock came storming out looking like thunder. When I glanced into the room, Boddy was wrapping a handkerchief around his hand. It was covered in blood. There's bound to be something I've forgotten, but I can't tell you any more at the moment.
There is nothing of interest here.
Why are you doing it, man? And don't talk to me about Brother Jerome and seeing the light. That won't wash.
Perhaps I did underestimate people's need for me here.
Well, what about the £5,000 that you lent me to set up my own company? What's going to happen to that? How do I know that Brother Jerome won't want his money back, eh?
No true friend need fear my intentions. Only those who are gambling that I'm a complete fool.
What do you mean, gambling?
Someone else's big gamble that didn't come off. Eh, Colonel?
Gun hidden behind books. Fingerprints Mr. Green, Professor Plum, and Colonel Mustard. Gun fired recently. No bullets. A hollowed-out book. Nothing in the book.
Today is the first day of my new life. A life which will affect you, my dear friends. After my crash, as you know, I was cared for by Brother Jerome and the monks of the Order of Silence. If you will forgive a poor joke, I was on the road to Damascus, not Arlington, when I was hit by that car. And now, nothing can be the same again. On Monday morning at 11:30, I will be received into that order as a novice by Brother Jerome himself, and I will turn over all my worldly goods to them.
For goodness sakes, man.
You are my friends, my dear friends, and I will be sure that you are taken care of as you deserve. I know I will be misunderstood, but my first action as a novice will be to assume the vow of silence.
Why are you doing this to me? Why are you ruining my life?
candlestick? Yes, yes. I saw Green going into the conservatory with a pair of them. Struck me at the time as an odd place to be taking them, but I never really thought any more about it until now. Yes, I took some rope from Miss Scarlett. She was a little overwrought. Wanted to scare the life out of Boddy with it. If you'll pardon the expression. I kept it with me until I got to the study. Well, I didn't want to be seen wandering around like a trainee hangman, so I dumped it there. I think that Boddy knew everything that was going on, you know. I had been gambling rather heavily, and I had even used the money which Boddy had loaned me to start the business. And I feel certain that he knew, because when I asked him whether the brothers would expect to be repaid immediately, he gave several veiled hints that he was aware of what I had done. He kept waving some letter or other under my nose, but I wasn't interested in that, and I can prove my innocence. At the time of the murder, I was in the lounge with Green and Mrs. White. They, as usual, seemed to have plenty to say to each other and wandered off. I went along to the library. Plum and I stayed there until we heard that Boddy had bought it. I think Miss Scarlett had come to the end of her tether. She wanted to frighten Boddy, give him a jolt, if you'll pardon the expression. Anyway, she came to me armed with a length of rope, but I told her that was a ridiculous idea and took it off her. Anyway, I suggested we could wire up his safe in the dining room. He was always locking things away in there, so that's what I did. It was just so unfortunate that Mrs. White came along first. But has anybody asked her what she was doing in Boddy's safe? To the best of my knowledge, she had no business opening it. I think Miss Scarlett had come to the end of her tether. She wanted to frighten Boddy, give him a jolt, if you'll pardon the expression. I think Miss Scarlett had come to the end of her tether. She wanted to frighten Boddy, give him a jolt, if you'll pardon the expression. Anyway, she came to me armed with a length of rope, but I told her that was a ridiculous idea and took it off her. Anyway, I suggested we could wire up his safe in the dining room. He was always locking things away in there, so that's what I did. It was just so unfortunate that Mrs. White came along first. But has anybody asked her what she was doing in Boddy's safe? To the best of my knowledge, she had no business opening it. Funny chap, Boddy, you know. He could be strangely generous and then turn nasty for no reason. Can't see him as a monk myself, and the idea of silence is totally laughable. Anyway, in one of his fits of generosity, he loaned me some money to start a company. My worry was that if he was serious about this monastery business, the brothers would want the money back, and I didn't have it. Although Boddy and I may have had an unusual relationship, the relationship between Green and Mrs. White was even stranger. After all, Green was a guest in this house, and Mrs. White is Boddy's housekeeper. So why did he allow her to treat him like a skivvy, carrying candlesticks around for her, bossing him around, and goodness knows what else? Well, I can't think of anything that I haven't already told you.
A drawer forced. No fingerprints. Blood on floor. Tests show blood to be Mr. Boddy's.
Who's there? Come on, Lionel! Thank you!
The devil looks after his own, doesn't he, Boddy?
Would you kindly tell me what you were trying to do?
If I couldn't find anything in here to stop you, I was going to kill you.
Is there anything you people won't do for money?
Don't you patronize me, Boddy. If you don't need your money anymore, then leave it to those of us who have to live in the real world.
However much I left you, you'd want more. Greed feeds on itself.
You promised me that loan. You went back on your word. And now the difference is you'll go into a monastery while I'll lose my home.
You'll thank me for this one day, my dear. Believe me. Now get out of here before I forget my good nature and call the police.
I can't help you at all with that. Isn't that a rather unlikely item to find around a country house?
You will know now about Mrs. White and Mr. Green stealing Boddy's antiques. When I found out, I foolishly accepted money in return for my silence. And I must tell you that I have had access to several weapons, or potential weapons, this weekend, but all against my better judgment. I did hide one of them in the library. It's bound to have my prints on it, but it was given to me by one of the other guests. The most unlikely people seem to have been prepared for violence this weekend. I saw Miss Scarlett sneaking around in the lounge with what appeared to be a very nasty-looking knife. She hid it in the log basket. Do you know, I never thought I would be accused of blackmail, but that's exactly what happened. It was all to do with Mrs. White and Mr. Green. I discovered that they were involved in something, and they paid me to keep quiet about it. But it's difficult to tell you now. Perhaps you could ask them first, and it won't seem so bad. I can tell you, though, that if it had all come out, Green would have had to go to jail, and he was threatening that his pals in the city would come after me. I wish I'd never guessed what was going on. But please, ask them first. I'm sorry. That's about it for the present, I'm afraid.
There is nothing of interest here.
Over the last 2 years, Mr. Green and I have been taking some of the antiques from the hall for cleaning. Only they never came back, if you see what I mean. Mr. Green had some good contacts in the city, and all he had to do was forge Boddy's signature. It all seemed very easy until the professor noticed that they were missing. We couldn't fob him off with lies, so Mr. Green had to pay him. Now I call that blackmail. Anyway, I think it was all Mr. Green's fault, but he made it pretty clear that if he went down, he'd take Plum and me with him. That's why I told the professor he should kill Mr. Green. But maybe he decided he'd do better to get rid of Mr. Boddy. I think Mr. Boddy had some proof that Mr. Green had been taking some of his antiques, and he probably knew that he'd had help. I think that he'd had a letter from the antique dealers in London. I saw him with a letter in the billiard room. He was talking to Colonel Mustard, but it was a most peculiar conversation. The Colonel was trying to get a sensible answer out of Mr. Boddy, but all Boddy could talk about was gambling. Anyway, he had the letter then, and I did try to get it back. Maybe the Colonel had something to do with Boddy's murder. I was with him and Mr. Green in the lounge after dinner, but after a while, Mr. Green and I went along to the kitchen, and I didn't see the Colonel again. I think I've told you everything I know. There should be some in the cupboard in the hall, although now I think of it, I didn't see any when I was looking in the cupboard earlier. I'm sure there was some.
Wrench. Fingerprints.
At one point, I decided that I should try to find some evidence that Boddy was lying about his intentions. I still could not believe it. So I broke into his desk. Unfortunately, he interrupted me, and I was still holding the knife I had used to force the drawer. I did tell him that I was going to kill him, but you appreciate that they were idle words. I was disappointed that all I found was a letter about his antiques, something to do with a forged signature. I left the letter in the lounge, but I rather think that may have been what Mrs. White was worrying about when she was coming round after her accident. She mentioned the letter. I'm sure I'll remember other interesting facts, but I've nothing to add right now. Oh, for goodness sake. Oh.
There was one point this weekend when I really thought that I could kill Uncle Boddy with my own hands. I suppose you know that this house is riddled with secret passages, and I was hiding in the one which goes to the study when I heard a dreadful row. Mrs. Peacock was trying to break into Uncle's desk. She'd just found a letter when Boddy surprised her. There was a bit of a tussle, and Uncle disarmed her. She had his knife. Anyway, that gave me an idea. I waited until they'd gone, and then I took the knife. Goodness knows what I intended to do with it. I hid it in the lounge in the end, just to get rid of it. I think I should tell you that I had borrowed heavily against my inheritance. If Uncle Boddy had given the monks everything, I would have had no home and no means of repaying the loans.
That was why I tried to involve the Colonel in a ploy to frighten Uncle. I had thought about using some rope somehow, but the Colonel said he had a better idea, one that was foolproof. He hadn't allowed for Mrs. White in his calculations. Anyway, although that attempt failed, there's nothing to say that the Colonel didn't try again later. Around the time of the murder, I was in the ballroom with Professor Plum. After a while, we both left, and I went to the dining room. Mrs. Peacock joined me there, and we were still there when we heard about Uncle. I think I've told you everything I know.
Boddy was full of promises. He wanted everyone to think he had their best interests at heart. So when he offered to lend me the money I needed to make some essential repairs to my home, I trusted him. That was my mistake. When he decided to give all his worldly goods to Brother Jerome, my loan was forgotten. But not, I assure you, by the builders who have now completed the work. You see, my home will be taken from me. I tried to persuade Miss Scarlett to help, but she just lost her temper. Anyway, after dinner I spent some time in the kitchen with Mrs. White. You'll have heard about her accident. Then I went to find Miss Scarlett to try to talk some sense into her. I found her in the dining room, and there we stayed until, well, you know. I can't think of anything that I haven't already told you.
I suppose you've got to know sometime, so I might as well be the one to tell you. Mrs. White and I had removed one or two of Boddy's antiques. We were hoping that he wouldn't miss them. And anyway, I thought that when I got my finances straight, I could put them back. But Plum cottoned on to what was happening, and I paid him to keep quiet. He says he didn't realize that it was blackmail. I tried to persuade Plum to get rid of Boddy for us. I had no wish to go to jail, and thought Plum should do something to earn his money. He may have killed Boddy for all I know. I certainly didn't see him around. I can't think of anything that I haven't already told you.
I've tried to remember what I saw and heard. There's nothing else.
I think I've told you everything I know.
Everything went completely out of control when Boddy announced that he was giving up all his worldly goods. All of a sudden, people seemed to think that I would make a good murderer. Green told me to kill Boddy, and Mrs. White told me to kill Mr. Green. Either of them could have killed Boddy, because I didn't see either of them at the relevant time. I was in the ballroom with Miss Scarlett immediately after dinner. Then, after a while, we went our separate ways, and I joined Mustard in the library. Oh, and on the way I caught a glimpse of Mrs. Peacock rushing into the conservatory. Seemed to be hiding something, I thought. Anyway, I didn't see either Mrs. White or Mr. Green.
Rope in corner.
You think the murder took place in the study? But who was the murderer? Which weapon? And this is your accusation? You think the murderer was Mrs. Peacock, in the study, with the rope?
Well done. You've got everything right. You've solved the murder mystery. Now, let's go through it stage by stage and see what happened.
Mrs. Peacock was convinced that she shared a special relationship with Mr. Boddy, so when he offered to lend her money to repair her home, she gratefully accepted. You can imagine how she felt when Mr. Boddy told her that he was joining a religious order, and she realized that she would not get a penny. She'd have to sell her home to pay for the repairs. Mrs. Peacock was infuriated. Mrs. Peacock saw Mr. Boddy go into the study, and she followed him. She tried to talk to him, but his only response was to patronize her. Looking at Mr. Boddy sitting there with his back to her, something snapped in Mrs. Peacock. She saw the rope that Colonel Mustard had left under the desk, and she grabbed it. Mr. Boddy was stronger than Mrs. Peacock, but he stood no chance. Using her foot on the back of the chair to give her strength, Mrs. Peacock dropped the rope around Mr. Boddy's neck and launched her attack. The footprint would act as evidence. She had to get rid of the rope, so she hurried to the conservatory, where she dumped it in a corner. Mrs. Peacock was hoping that it would stay undetected for some time. Then, as calm as she could be, she went to the dining room and talked to Miss Scarlett until they got the news.
And that is how Mr. Boddy met his end. Why not come back and try to solve the next murder mystery at Arlington Hall?